I've been wondering for years why so many people believe things that are obviously false. So I decided to do some research on how propaganda actually works on the human brain. Because there is a pattern here. The people who fall for propaganda are not randomly distributed across the population. They share very specific psychological vulnerabilities that propaganda is deliberately designed to exploit. Propaganda has been a science for almost 100 years, and the people using propaganda against you right now know exactly what they're doing. Here are the 4 ways propaganda actually works on your brain. 1. The repetition trap. You've heard the same lies so many times you've stopped noticing that they are lies. That is not by accident. In 1977, psychologists Lynn Hasher, David Goldstein, and Thomas Tapino at Villanova and Temple universities ran a study where they showed volunteers a series of statements. Some of those statements were true, and some of those statements were false. They showed these statements across multiple sessions weeks apart from each other. What they found destroyed the assumption that people can simply recognize false information and reject it. Statements that were repeated over multiple sessions were rated as significantly more truthful than statements people had only seen once. It didn't matter whether that statement was actually true. It didn't matter whether the person knew the statement was false before going into the study. Repetition overrode prior knowledge almost every time. Psychologists call this the illusionary truth effect. When the brain mistakes familiarity with truth, the more times you hear something, the more times your brain processes that thing as credible. Not because the evidence changed, but because repetition makes information easier to process, and your brain interprets that ease as reliability. That is why the stolen election lie did not die after 61 courts rejected it. That is why the claim that immigrants cause more crime persists after every study shows the opposite. That is why vaccines and autism remain linked in many people's minds, despite the original study being retracted and its author losing his medical license for fraud. These people were not persuaded by evidence. They were worn down by volume. Say it enough times, and the brain starts to believe it. That is the default setting for most human brains. The only way to defeat that is education. 2. The engineering of consent. Propaganda does not work by changing your mind. It works by bypassing your mind entirely. In 1928, Edward Bernays, the man widely regarded as the father of modern public relations, published a book called Propaganda. In the book, he described with remarkable truth exactly how public opinion is manufactured and controlled. Bernays believed that manipulating what the public thinks is not just acceptable in a democracy, it's necessary, and he considered himself one of the people doing it. Bernays called this the engineering of consent. Engineering of consent is the deliberate manipulation of public opinion not through argument or evidence, but through the strategic control of symbols, emotions, and associations that bypass rational thought entirely. You do not convince people, you make them feel something, and then you attach that feeling to whatever you want them to believe. This is the entire operating model of right-wing media. Fox News does not deliver information. It delivers emotion, fear, outrage, contempt, the warm satisfaction of having an enemy to blame. The facts are not important. The feeling is the product. You do not come away more informed. You come away more afraid, more angry, and more certain that the people on the other side are your enemies. Bernays named this method in 1928. It has been running at an industrial scale in American right-wing media for 30 years. 3. The Firehose of Falsehood. Repetition and emotion are not enough on their own. If repetition creates belief, and emotion bypasses reason, the most powerful propaganda strategy is not to tell just one convincing lie. It's to tell hundreds of unconnected lies simultaneously, at maximum volume, across every available channel, faster than anyone can fact-check them. In 2016, researchers Christopher Paul and Miriam Matthews at the RAND Corporation published a study on how certain political movements use lies as deliberate weapons. Researchers call this the Firehose of Falsehood. It's when a political movement deliberately floods every information channel with so many lies so fast that the population loses its ability to identify what's true or not anymore. The goal is not to convince anyone of any specific thing. The goal is to destroy the shared factual foundation that makes coherent public debate possible. When nobody agrees on what is real, nobody can organize against what is wrong. Watch any of the Trump press conferences from the last 10 years. Researchers at the Washington Post counted over 30,000 false or misleading statements during his first term alone. The volume of lies is not incompetence. It's a strategy. No fact-checking operation on Earth can keep up with 30,000 lies. The Firehose of Falsehoods does not need to win any argument. It just needs to make argument itself feel pointless. Anybody feeling overwhelmed right now? That's the plan. When people stop believing anything is true, they stop fighting back. 4. Identity lock. Here's where propaganda stops being a communication problem and becomes a psychological one. The first 3 mechanisms work on almost anyone, but there is a 4th mechanism that makes propaganda almost impossible to reverse once it has taken hold. In 1957, psychologist Leon Festinger at Stanford University published his landmark research on cognitive dissonance. He found that when people hold a belief that is contradicted by evidence, they do not update their beliefs. They experience psychological pain, and then construct whatever justification is necessary to protect that belief from the evidence. Psychologists call this identity protective cognition, when a belief becomes so fused with a person's sense of who they are that someone challenging that belief is felt as an attack on that person. At that point, the brain stops processing incoming information at all. It processes that information as a threat, and it responds to threats the way it always does, with aggression, with deflection, and rejection. This is why Trump supporters who lost their jobs because of tariffs still defend tariffs. This is why every piece of evidence that Trump committed crimes is processed not as evidence, but as proof of a conspiracy against Trump. The belief is no longer a conclusion they reached. It is who they are, inside. Propaganda is not designed to convince everyone. It's designed to find the most vulnerable people in the room and exploit them. The people with fragile identities, the people who lost community, the people who need belonging badly enough to accept any story that provides belonging. If you can see the mechanism behind propaganda, you were never the target. But the people who cannot see it are everywhere. And there were enough of these people to change the outcome of an election. The people running this operation are not trying to convince you. They're counting on you doing nothing while they convince everyone else. Some people will wake up when the lies finally cost them something they cannot ignore. Most people won't. For the rest of us, the answer is not to argue louder. It's to understand exactly what we're up against. Propaganda is a science, and so is the resistance to propaganda. The propaganda machine is running on the most vulnerable people in your life right now, and it won't stop until it costs them something they cannot explain away.